first in the series, the 5 elements of a performance-based contract manager training series. Okay, raise your hand if you want your team to love doing the same repetitive contracting task hour after hour, day after day. Now, we need to really deal with the reality of artificial intelligence. Contracting is going to change because of artificial intelligence. And in my opinion, you and your team need to become experts at drafting, negotiating, and managing complex contract structures. Performance-based contracts are complex because we typically do not use a template contract for them. They require some level of customization or tailoring. And when they are drafted and negotiated properly, they are very powerful at driving customer related business objectives from their supply chain base. It's going to be years before artificial intelligence in the form of a large language model will be programmed effectively enough to replace human beings who now work with complex contracts, meaning those contracts that are somewhat tailored or custom. They're not a template. Artificial intelligence, however, will continue to automate repetitive contracting tasks at an ever increasing speed, which will include drafting and negotiating simplistic contracts. Companies must drive performance from their suppliers, and those simple contracting structures that artificial intelligence will take over are not particularly effective at driving performance. Supply chains are changing, and while buying organizations are trying to control the risks from those changes. Now, take for example all of the changes in the supply chain that we've seen year after year, ranging from supplier consolidation to demand outstripping supply to the introduction of artificial intelligence. A simplistic contract that artificial intelligence can draft will not adapt to those kinds of supply chain changes. Human beings, using well-written, fairly negotiated, and well-managed performance-based contracts, can adapt to the changes of the supply chain while also ensuring supplier performance. The content from this webinar series can be found in the Contract Professionals Playbook, the 4th book that I've authored, and is co-authored by Lawrence A. Kane. You can find it here at this email address or at Amazon.com. Okay, let's get started. Here is our agenda. What is a performance-based contract and the 5 critical components. If your team is not super clear about what a performance-based contract is, no worries. This webinar series will provide you with the tips, techniques, and guidance to help your team work effectively with performance-based contracts. Performance-based contracts are a class of agreements where payments for goods and services is contingent upon the supplier achieving clearly outlined performance goals or desired outcomes. This is why this is a complex contract that often is not well suited to a template. Now, this is different from paying a supplier for a one-off delivery, and it's even different from a contract where that delivery happens once a month over a definitive period of time. That's because in order for it to be a performance-based contract, we need to see all 5 components that I'm about to list in the agreement. And each one of those components has to have some form of tailoring or customization in order to drive the right kind of performance from the supplier. The goal of a performance-based contract is to align the business objectives, the specifications in the statement of work, or maybe a technical specification, and the contract terms and conditions. Alignment means ensuring all the elements of the supplier's work are included in the services as outlined in the statement of work. All the risks associated with the supplier's work need to be addressed in the contract terms and conditions. The contract then forms a framework to administer, monitor, and manage the supplier's performance after the contract has been executed. So this isn't a sign it and put it in the drawer kind of contract. The key to your team's success is to make sure that the supplier understands its role and its responsibilities. Now, this is true for both the customer and the supplier contract professionals. What I mean by that is that the responsibilities have to be laid out in verbs in a statement of work. And I'm going to talk about this more in the next session. Both the contract professional for the buying organization and the contract professional for the sales supplier organization have to thoroughly understand that supplier's role and its responsibilities in completing the work. Okay, the 5 critical components. Typically, performance-based contracts contain the 5 following critical components. And I'll go into each one of them in a little bit more detail after I list them here. First, there is a performance work statement, which is a governmental term, or what we call a performance-based statement of work. It can also be a technical specification. 2, a quality assurance plan. Now, a quality assurance plan is specific. You might have something like this in your organization, but it may have a different name. But it assures that the quality of the supplier's work meets certain specifications. Third, performance-based metrics. Now, lots of teams have all kinds of metrics. The metrics that we're looking for are things like on-time delivery, on budget, things like that. 4, contractual incentives or disincentives, what we would call penalties if we really had penalties in a contract. And then finally, number 5 is the right type of pricing model, which when combined with the other 4 elements really drives supplier performance. So let's look at the first one, the first element, a performance work statement or a performance-based statement of work. This clearly identifies in the contract this technical specification, the scope of work, and possibly in the terms and conditions themselves, the expected deliverables. So let's talk a little bit more about work requirements. Work requirements are details about the goods or services that the supplier will deliver. They are typically written before bidders submit a proposal. So typically, buyers will write this with their own internal resources or subject matter expert. The work requirements can be written in the form of a statement of work or as a technical specification. The supplier must meet all of the work requirements to fully deliver the goods and services. Now, this is when we get into the super fun part when I talk about T's and C's in a later segment of the manager training series, where we talk about how to ensure that through terms and conditions such as corrective action plans or catchback plans. If any of you have seen any of your enterprise-wide software go off schedule, then there's usually some sort of catchback plan that gets that back on schedule. That's an element or an indication that you have a performance-based contract. 2, a quality assurance surveillance plan. I don't think people really talk about them like that. Like 20 years ago, I think we had these, but in manufacturing, there's definitely some sort of quality assurance plan, and there's something very similar, but named differently depending on the type of software that you're purchasing and whether you're doing it under an agile module or not. Okay, so the quality assurance plan, whatever it happens to be called, is the document that personnel use to assess and accept contractor performance. That plan identifies what is going to be inspected, what the inspection process looks like, and who will be doing the inspecting. Now, you can repeat this all with testing in a software, meaning the plan will identify what will be tested, what the testing process will look like, and who will be doing the testing. Now, this is separate from metrics, which we'll talk about in a moment. This quality assurance surveillance plan is used for managing contractor performance by using assessments that ensure that the quality meets the level specified in the statement of work or the technical specification, that the supplier has delivered the results that the buyer wanted in the first place. It also corresponds to the performance objectives and the standards, quality, quantity, timeliness, that are in the technical specification or in the statement of work. It also provides details on how the buying company are going to do that by survey, observation, tests, sampling, evaluation, documentation, etc. Once all of those standards are met, typically the good or the service is accepted, which typically will trigger some sort of milestone payment or formal final payment, and could also trigger the beginning of the warranty period. That's how important it is to be able to assess supplier performance, whether it's in goods or in services. 3, performance-based metrics. In order to have performance-based metrics, you've got to get the performance right. Just because you and the supplier have reached some sort of contractual arrangement does not necessarily mean that what was written on paper will actually come true. Performance measures should be reasonable, achievable, and limited to just a few metrics. Because these metrics are so critically important to be able to determine that the supplier is performing, the buyer uses these metrics to communicate the business results internally to their own stakeholders that the supplier is in fact performing according to specifications or to the statement of work. So that's they're not just a backwards looking, hey, you didn't do this right. When done right, they provide valuable information to the stakeholders that the supplier is performing, to people who may not otherwise be aware of it. And they can also be forward looking, providing insight into how to perform differently when there are changes in the supply chain or other types of business environmental changes. 4, contractual incentives or disincentives. Incentives are things like a bonus for exceptional performance or liquidated damages, or service level credits for poor performance. We'll talk a lot more about this in a later manager training session. And 5, the right pricing model. Okay, so what does this mean to you? Organizations should shift to a pricing model when the work is more complex, variable in nature, and there's a higher likelihood of creating value by working more closely with suppliers. For example, you could be trying to reduce costs, both theirs and yours. You could try to improve speed to market, or you could be innovating. By working more closely with suppliers, the buying organization can leverage a variety of pricing mechanisms for different types of work. What that means is we could have some work on a T&M basis, time and materials, while the rest of the work could be a direct cost pass through. And that way we create a model where the management fees are agreed upon upfront and are transparent. We can also agree upon incentives and liquidated damages as appropriate. Combining those different pricing mechanisms along with transparent management fees, incentives or bonuses, liquidated damages, or service level credits becomes a pricing model that can drive supplier performance because there aren't the hidden disincentives associated with some of the pricing mechanisms. I've got additional resources here. So in my book, Getting to We, I talk a lot more about how to drive value through collaborative relationships. And in this white paper, several authors and I talk a lot more about how to determine the pricing model. We unpack the theories behind pricing models and we give examples if you're interested. All right, so here's our bottom line. A performance-based contract with all 5 components forms the framework to administer, monitor, and manage supplier performance after the contract has been executed. This is not a draft it and put it in the drawer and don't look at it again until you get a reminder that it's time for renewal. Because all 5 elements are so important, the technical specification or a performance work statement, statement of work, the type of quality plan that you are going to utilize in order to determine that the product or good or the service meets your specifications, the performance metrics to determine that they are continually performing, the incentives and disincentives, and the pricing model all combined form a performance-based contract. So now my question to you is, do you have performance-based contracts in your organization? If your contract professionals feel frustrated and overwhelmed, they have a stack of stuck deals, and less skilled people avoid having to deal with the tricky contracts, it might be because they're being asked to do work lawyers did a generation ago without the training, skills, or techniques to be effective. Niden on Negotiation provides your team with top-tier contract negotiation training programs to upskill everyone with proven content and a personalized approach to take back control of contract negotiations. All training programs include live coaching with me. If you'd like to learn more, visit this link.